Okay, so it looks like we're live. I'm waiting for some comments to come through to make sure that people can see us. Don't see any yet. We'll wait. Okay, there we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darling Nisi, and I am here to present the ladies panel of our Welcome to America celebration today. So quick introductions. I'm actually going to ask people to introduce themselves. So looking at the screen, we will start with the legendary Miss TLC.
I don't know about legendary, but thank you. I am Miss TLC. That's my handle on any social media. I have 2 decades now in the music industry, and so I generally like to provide a business and consumer perspective on Prince's illustrious career because he is my number one forever and always.
Awesome. All right, Miss Rhonda Nicole.
Hey everybody, my name is Rhonda Nicole. I'm a singer and a songwriter and a music journalist and a social media marketer and a whole lot of other things. Kind of mirroring what Ms. TLC said, I've got quite a few years of experience in music and entertainment, both as talent and as not talent. And Prince is my number one for a lot of crazy reasons, all of which I'm sure we'll get a chance to discuss at some point. Really happy to be here. Thank you guys.
Great. Now, Miss Tonya Pendleton.
I am Tonya Pendleton. I am a music journalist and a radio personality to some degree, and definitely a lifetime Prince fam, aficionado, critic now, cultural critic, and all those kinds of good things. And I'm just really here to listen to the perspectives of all these wonderful women that I'm sharing the panel with.
Awesome. And last but not least, Miss Erica Thompson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erica Thompson. I'm a journalist in Columbus, Ohio, and I do a lot of writing on Prince and spirituality.
Thank you, everyone. I am so excited to talk to you guys. My name is Darlene Nisi, or also known as KaNisa Williams. And I want to get into a lot of different things today. But first question, I want to ask, what was your experience like listening to this album for the first time? Is there anything that you did special? Do you listen to Prince albums in a particular way? Or just what was your experience? And we'll start with Tonya.
Let's see. What was my experience listening to this album initially or ongoing experiences? Well, let me say initially. Initially, I was just so excited to be able to hear a new, quote unquote, new Prince album again. It had that feeling of when I used to get the album, and it was the album then, and open it up out of the wrapping paper and sit down and give it a listen and just try to figure out what I was listening to, because I think Prince always expanded your mind and your consciousness whenever you would have a first listen. So for me, I just really liked the energy of this album initially. I just really picked up on what felt like good vibes. You know, it's like when you listen to 70s soul or the kind of music where, you know, people spent time making it and they were in the studio really crafting it and putting the music together in these very organic ways. That's kind of how I felt. Like the energy just felt good with it. I didn't get too deep into the lyrics. I didn't get too deep into who was singing what and playing where. It just was, this is some good energy coming from this release.
Okay. How about you, Rhonda? As a musician, what was your take the first time you heard this album?
First of all, it was the first time I'd heard any of the songs. I honestly don't recall knowing that this album existed prior to a couple months ago. And that could be because 2009, 2010 was a pretty traumatic and stressful time in my life. So I may have just forgotten about it. But I don't recall hearing any of the music before. So it was very exciting, to Tanya's point, to hear something that was brand new and not something that I had been listening to for 30 something years that had just been remastered and made to sound modern. From a music perspective, one of the things that I've really liked about this album, two things. I love the girls. I love the way that Liv and Elisa and Shelby come through on the tracks. Their voices are just delectable, and the arrangements are just exquisite. They sound gorgeous. I also love the fact that because it's a more sparse band and the music itself is maybe not as complex as other things that Prince does, which I think some people in previous panels have sort of pointed out as it being too simplistic, but it lets you hear everything. You can really hear the guitar work on this album. And for me, having listened to Prince for so long, and I get lost in listening to things that are happening in other parts of the arrangements that aren't necessarily obvious, this has been a great opportunity to just really pay attention to what's happening in the front of the mix. So for me, I really have loved the voices and the vocal arrangements, as well as the instrumentation. I just think it's really, really cool to get something like this that sounds so fresh and so modern, even though it is, a decade old.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dig into the ladies a little bit later because I have a bone to pick with some folks that said some things earlier in panels. But before we go there, Miss TLC, what's your take on this album for the first time?
I was honestly transported. I felt like there was such a clean energy because this was, as everyone has mentioned today and in this panel just in these few minutes, it was the first cohesive new project in its entirety. And whether or not you heard versions of the songs or whether or not you had listened to the singles before, because I know D'Angela said before she preferred to try to avoid even listening to the singles so that she can just hear it as one sequenced project. It felt that way. It felt very warm. It felt very organic. There's obviously, one streamlined message, which everybody has been discussing today, and I know we'll dig into deeper. But it was one of those projects that it really felt like it was a piece of his history, but it still felt fresh and new and now. It felt like Prince was here. He's in the room when you're listening to it. You're back at a show with him. And I was just very pleasantly surprised because knowing that it was, in a sense, put together without him, even though Morris had produced it and, played different versions for him while he was around. It still is a posthumous release. So you're not 100% sure what you're going to get with that. And if you feel that there's a connection to that artist and to their sensibilities, when they were here. And I think that it does come through that way. I think that it's very refreshing.
Okay. How about you, Erica?
Yeah, so I did my best to wait for the party at Paisley Park, which we were both at, KaNisa. And even though I had a relationship with 1,000 Light Years from Here from Black Muse and Same Page, Different Book and When She Comes, but I didn't. And I guess I did hear the title track and Born to Die, right? So, but the rest of it, I did my best not to listen to. And then, like D'Angela was saying, I was a little disappointed because we didn't have like a really engaging listening session at Paisley Park. It was just in the background as we all mingled. So when I finally sat down with it, I was just in my living room doing a puzzle. And I have the vinyl, but my system is not set up quite right. So I feel like I didn't get a true experience until I got in my car. And once I did that, I will say I played Rin Tin Tin like 3 times in a row. And I haven't heard anybody except maybe the Michael Dean podcast talk about how cold that song is. Like, I'm just listening to
I love
it.
it.
I love
it.
Prince. Yeah.
I love it.
I know, right? So
Yeah.
that's been my experience.
Okay. So now we're going to spend the next 90 minutes talking about When She Comes. No, I'm just kidding. I keep joking about that. But we are going to get to that. But before we get to that, I want to dig into the promotion because I know a lot of us have talked about it and the different panels and how it compares to the promotion for the deluxe editions, whether it was A Sign of Times or 1999 or even Purple Rain, and how they're doing it differently. Of course, this is the first kind of big deluxe type of set that Sony has had its hands on. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts about how you feel they're doing with it this time, both in America or abroad, as we've been seeing things pop up on their social media. So I'm going to start with Ms. TLC on this one.
I was very pleased, just dialing back with the the previous releases and the way that things had been rolled out with Sign of the Times and with even the originals. I've not really had many issues with the attention that they've given to the projects. I have been happy to see that there's been attention paid outside of just the community. There definitely was generalized marketing going on there. But for this project in particular, I think that they knew that there was a very pertinent and pressing message in the state of the world right now, and they knew that they could capitalize on that. And I'm glad that they did. I'm glad that they did try to work in a lot of the themes and the concepts, and they really drove home the point that, you know, Prince was a prophet in that this is not a new project, and yet it still fits into 2021. And I like that they tied that in, because it I think would trigger people to think like, well, if I haven't dug into his previous catalog, perhaps I should, because he, you know, is somewhat publicized as you know, an electronic rock pop artist, you know, mainstream, but in a lot of ways he's a very underground experimental niche artist as well. So, you know, if people get into a lot more of the scholastic, like deeper concepts of what he's presented in the albums that we all know about, you know, through the 90s and beyond, then I think that it's a positive just for the development of what they're going to release from the vault going forth. Because, you know, hope that there are other, you know, full projects that they're going to put out in the same way. But this one was pressing and it was necessary. And because it was so needed right now, I think that they worked that into the promotion, to my satisfaction, at least.
Okay. And I'm just noticing that everybody on this panel, besides me, works in media in some way. So everybody can answer this from a professional standpoint. But Erica, how about you? How do you feel the promotion went this time around?
I have been really pleased with it. I think I feel like this album has been everywhere, just seeing the reviews, seeing the charts. To be quite honest with you, though, I divorce myself from what's going on with the estate, all of the business decisions that are being made. I think there are plenty of fans who can have a handle on that. And I've just kind of made peace with whatever happens is what's going to happen. And I'm just going to buy everything and listen and analyze like the lyrics and the themes. But I think they're doing a spectacular job. I love seeing like what's going on in different countries with some of the promotion. And I will say, just interacting with casual fans, I really feel like it's having an impact. I love how excited folks are getting, like, who don't know much about Prince and are like, wow, he has a full album in his vault like this and it's coming out and it's relevant to today. So I've been really happy with it and I think it's working.
Okay. Miss Tonya?
I think they did a phenomenal job of promoting this release, basically because they promoted it as though it was a brand new release. They promoted it as though Prince was here and he was just unavailable or decided in his eclectic, mercurial way not to be the front face of it. So it felt as though it was an album that was viewed as one that was contemporary and current, not necessarily a legacy release. They got all the major reviews from New York Times through to Billboard, I believe. So something that would have happened in the event that Prince was here. And you felt like it was everywhere. And not just because you were a super Prince fan or someone who follows him as an artist, you did feel like it penetrated sort of the mainstream consciousness from the CBS interviews to the podcast. And so I think they did a very, very, or made a very concerted effort to make this project be among the ones that we were able to interact while Prince was still in the physical realm. And I think they did a fantastic job of putting it out there as something contemporary and current. And I think that has made all the difference in the response to it.
Okay. And of course, Miss Rhonda?
Absolutely agree. One of the things that I liked the most about the promo for this album was the fact that we got to see somebody other than members of the Revolution. And as much as we love the Revolution and we love that era of his music, all of us, you know, are quite aware that there was so much more that he did and so much more that he represented throughout the rest of his career. And there were some incredible wildly talented individuals who were part of that journey with him. So to see Shelby and Mr. Hayes and others be spotlighted in this way really made it that much more special. I thought that the way that they utilized social media to promote the record was brilliant. I thought it was really, really cool that they tapped into TikTok. So we all kind of remember, I think it was either late last year or earlier this year, Prince's music started appearing on TikTok. So it's available for a much younger audience to even discover, and to use that platform to do the exclusive or, the initial launch of Hot Summer, I thought was really smart. Everything that they've done from the podcast and the CBS specials, as Tonya mentioned, it's just been really smart and really strategic. And I think that that's something that sometimes gets lost in the sauce when people in other spaces are talking about how it's too commercial or it's too mainstream or he wouldn't have wanted this. And it's like, this is how you do an album rollout. And whereas what we saw with like the Sign of the Times release last year is that it was like mostly us getting really excited about it. And again, this is a record that we've been listening to for 30 something years, but this was something new that, the deep Prince fam could share with people who were maybe not as familiar, and bring them into the fold and have something that all of us are starting fresh from. Nobody has a hierarchy of, oh, I've heard this and this and this.
Right.
This is something where we're all kind of starting from ground zero together with it.
That is a good point, because I know personally I had some issues with previous rollouts, the focusing on certain people, and I appreciate how we kind of zoomed out for this one and talked more about what the social impact, what was going on at the time, not so much about his personal relationships and different things like that, or any other influences that might have been around that were around but were not interviewed or included this time. But kind of going back to that conversation about legacy, we've talked about the concerts and the album itself, but there's also the concept of Prince touring, and he's doing the hits again. It's kind of musicology part 2. So when you're thinking about how this era, especially his performance from about into 2010 through the Euro tours, I count all the way to the Australia stops of this era of Prince touring again, it's kind of the last international tour that he was touring this much. We have Hit and Run later, and also the Piano Mike, of course. But this is kind of like the last time we see Prince across the world, and it's kind of like this very special point in time. So did this point in time have any special resonance for you as a fan at the time? Or how do you see this point in time kind of sitting in the legacy of Prince? And for this question, I'll start with Erica.
Oh, this is a loaded question for me. And I prepared some notes that I think are relevant to it. And I don't know if it's totally on topic, but I'm just going to answer it how I answer it. So I followed Prince's every move in the 2000s. And I think for someone like me, it was just a really special time. And I've been struggling lately processing this album and listening to the official Prince podcast. And it's hard for me not to cry, because I would just say the whole 2000s up until he passed away were really meaningful for me. And I think to make a larger point, I think whatever decade of Prince that you drop into, he's doing something really compelling. Like for folks who were witnessing him real time in the 80s, you guys got to hear all the classic music in real time and like the Purple Rain mania. But if you were in the 90s, he was still having the hits. He was everywhere on black TV shows, black award shows. He was changing his name and challenging the industry, challenging how we felt about identity. And then when you get to the 2000s, you start, at least for me with the Rainbow Children, a really challenging album, both musically and spiritually and socially. And then, so as I'm learning about this guy, we hit 2004 and he's everywhere. So I get to experience the musicology tour, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performance, the solo. And again, he's still challenging the industry by including the album and the ticket sales and doing all of that. And then you get 3121. And I didn't get the golden ticket when I bought my CD, and I was really mad, but I was just highly engaged for that. And then it's like, okay, we get to 2009. Now he's going to drop a triple album. Oh my gosh, like what is he doing? And I remember where I was when I heard Same Page, Different Book, and Zahir. I'm sorry you didn't like it, but I love that song. I was so excited, and then I was so sad that it was just only available for a short time. And then I went to the Welcome to America tour, one of the Madison Square Garden shows with Graham Central Station and Sheila E. and Sinbad, and that was a wonderful time. And I mean, I obviously the shows are really hits heavy, and I would have, looking back on it now, I wish he would have incorporated some of this music into the shows, but it was just still a wonderful time. And then just being in the audience and seeing all of the celebrities that were there, and he just had so much attention on him. And I think, like, I wrote a review of the show and I called him like the last rock star standing, because I think I heard another critic say, when you think about the other people who came out when Prince came out, they were not performing at the same level that he was in 2010, 2011. So he was just still this giant after all of these years. So it's a really special time for me, and I think he did well on those tours.
Okay. How about you, Tonya? I think you're muted.
You muted yourself.
Okay.
After, sorry about that, y'all. So after watching the Blu-ray, I literally went back into my old email so that I could try to figure out what I was doing in 2010 that I wasn't at that show, because I feel like those shows in Los Angeles, the one that is on the Blu-ray, I feel like that was the time when Prince was also doing a bunch of private parties, and he was doing these shows at the Roosevelt Hotel. Does anybody remember that? And there were shows where he was at the Roosevelt and he was in and out, like they weren't like in a stage, but everybody was like in some, like in the lobby or so. I forget how the setup was. And I think just watching that show just made me relive those moments of going to the shows and being so excited, and just the anticipation. And then Prince would come out, and the way that he came out so dramatically on that tour up from the stage, and just everything about it. It was creative. It was, the women had such they were focused on so much in that particular show, and then all of the hits and the music and the performance, and you could just tell like Prince was like right in his prime, and not the prime that we all think of, which is Purple Rain, or not all of us, but people outside of our realm that think of Prince's prime as being in the 80s. You felt like at that stage in his career, he was just at that period, that peak period of mastery. And he just had it oozing out of everything, every musical choice, everything that he did that was different. And I think for me, it was happy and sad, because I was like, how did I miss that particular tour? But to see it come to life again in that Blu-ray it just made me remember everything that I loved about him, and everything that was fantastic about the performances and the show and the showmanship and the skill and the background vocals and how the show was put together and the cues. And it just was bittersweet, I guess, in a sense. But I think if we're talking about the legacy of his music at that time, again, I just feel like he was a master at his craft, and you really saw it in that particular stage of his career. He had settled into being, genius, master, and was just really exemplifying just a person at the peak of their craft at that moment in his career.
Okay, Miss TLC.
I want to go back to just when D'Angela and Ricky and I had spoken to Dwayne Tudal a couple weeks ago about his book. KaNisa had, started the hashtag Blame Prince, which in a lot of ways, we all can recognize that when Prince is your favorite artist of all time, and when you actively follow his prolific and extensive career and catalog, you're spoiled in a sense. And unfortunately, you do take elements of, having all of that music for granted. You always know there's going to be another album, there's going to be another tour, there's going to be more shows. And especially, for someone like myself being in New York, you always take that for granted as well, that every show is going to come to you. There's going to be multiple shows, and there's always going to be a tomorrow in a sense. And I'll admit, with Welcome to America, I was in a sense kind of saddened and taken aback, because to me that was the first time that it seemed like he was finally getting a little repetitive, because it was Musicology Part 2. And when that tour and that album had dropped, there was also, as you had referenced, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame going on. He was out, front and center again, doing tons of interviews, joking around, on every talk show. And it was a truly invigorating time, all the television appearances and the awards and stuff. But then with Welcome to America, he did the press conference, and of course I was hype, and I know I was going to go to a bunch of those shows as well. But then seeing it in person, of course, there's nothing that you can say that's actually wrong with the show. It's perfect. It's amazing. But again, you're spoiled as a Prince fan. And just thinking back, I thought that every, stadium or arena, massive international tour that he had done was very different, just in theme and feel, and the wardrobe and the set list. And if you look back from Second Coming, or if you jump ahead to Love Sexy, or Purple Rain, anything, and then One Night Alone, Musicology, all of those tours had like a much different feel. But Musicology and Welcome to America do feel very similar, and yet they're 6-7 years apart. So there was an element, like, I will admit that to me, it was like, oh, is he going to just do this now? Not that I wasn't going to still go to every show, even if he did it again like that in 2015 and 20 and 30. But that was my initial reaction. If I'm being honest, it was like, oh, this is the first time around that he seems to be doing like the same kind of thing. But again, when you actually go to the shows, there's nothing you can say that's negative. It's like, this is the best live performer of all time. And I loved that at least those greatest hits kind of set lists allowed me the opportunity to force, in a sense, people to go who maybe weren't in the community, or, friends and family members that were just sick and tired of hearing me talk about Prince for years. And I exposed them that way to come to either the Musicology or the Welcome to America tour, to see that this is the greatest performer of all time, and you're blessed to live in the same lifetime as him. So you should come and take advantage of these shows. So that was a good thing, because I do believe that I converted a lot of people during those times.
I mean, that's fair, because I always struggle. I like one of the Musicology shows, the LA one that they showed in the theaters, but I agree. The hits tours don't really do it a lot for me. Like, I prefer the tours where he's promoting an actual album and playing songs from the album for more than half the set list. But I mean, of course, if you go, it's still going to be a great show regardless. Right. But I'm going to tend to skip most of the bootlegs from this this run. Or, I mean, I'll mute it and watch him, and out of the corner of my eye, see him like crying across the stage or something. But yeah, it's not my steez either. But Rhonda, what's your take on this era of Prince and how it fits into his legacy?
So from the perspective of the Welcome to America shows, of course, the tour did not come to Dallas, and I'm still living in Dallas at the time, which is my hometown. So I went to one of the Madison Square Garden shows in New York, like right before New Year's 2010. And then I went to one forum show in late May. I got one of those $25 floor seat things, which was great. So I hadn't thought about the connection between, or the similarity between the musicology shows and Welcome to America tour until just now. But yeah, now that I think about it, they were very similar. It was an interesting time to go to his shows for me, because one, they were, that particular tour was away from where I live. So it felt like an event. And it did feel very much, even in that moment, like he was kind of getting into I do this because I can, not because I have to, which I think for an artist of his caliber, and for any artist to actually get to a point in their career where they can even recognize that I don't have to keep putting out music. I can continue to reimagine the music that I've already done and share that with a fan base that wants to hear it. And I think, by 2010, Prince had long gotten to a point where he was really just focused on making music for his people, the people who wanted it. He had gotten away from the need and the contractual obligations, if you will, to create something that would please the masses. And he was really able to just do what he wanted to do for the people whom I think he felt wanted to hear it and would appreciate it the most. I enjoyed the integration of new artists. Like, I'd never seen Janelle Monáe before live. I'd seen her, performing on different award shows, and I'd seen her videos. But the Madison Square Garden show was the first time I ever saw her on stage, and I was captivated. I was like, what? Like, first of all, I had not had the chance to go to other Prince shows in earlier eras where there were opening acts. So it was really cool to go and see somebody not technically on his label, not technically related to his universe musically, opening the show. It was amazing to hear at the Forum show, Future Soul Song opened the show. Like, what? Like, who does that? And the integration of other covers and other songs. There was a great segment, I think, at the Forum show. It was where Liv and Shelby and Elisa did Amel Laroux's No One Else. So again, just a really interesting mix of music. And so, yes, it was very hits heavy. And it was a lot of stuff that I had heard before, but there was also an element of surprise for me for both of those shows. And it was really great. Now in retrospect, thinking about it from musicology onward, to get to go to see him and know that he's going to do songs that I've heard a billion times before, but there's also going to be an element of surprise. There's also going to be something else thrown into the mix that I was not expecting when I walked in the door.
Okay. So something that I keep seeing in the chat, and also things that you guys are bringing up as well, is the way that he was promoting either people who are in his band or other artists that he wanted more people to know about, like a Janelle Monáe, or Mint Condition has always been around, or doing the NPG Music and Arts Festival across the pond, where he's bringing all these people together again. So my question, because I know, even though I just said I don't spend a lot of time with these bootlegs, I of course spend a lot of time. And I'm thinking about the Chicago shows in particular, and the after shows of the Chicago shows, and how Andy was in the band, and people feel a way about Andy, or people feel a way when you go to an after show and it's mostly Shelby singing. This was even back, like at the Vegas hits too. So I want to ask, like, what are you guys' thoughts about the ladies that he was promoting that were in his band, like a Liv, a Shelby, a Lisa, an Andy even, and what the back is toward them? Sometimes you guys have any thoughts about that? And we can just free for all if anyone has a passionate thought about that.
Yeah, I'll jump in first if I can. Or Miss TLC, you can go first.
Oh, no. I was going to.
Well, I mean, the Prince fan community is a microcosm of society. So there is anti-Blackness and colorism. And I think that's where some of the backlash is coming, like toward Shelby or toward any of the other women of color that he was elevating at that time. And Camila Cummings is a great scholar on this. I would recommend that you check out her writing and her presentations. And she mentioned this in the chat, but Prince was being very intentional about putting Black women of color in the forefront during this time. Like a few other people have mentioned during today, like seeing Lettucey was amazing for me. That I'm like, oh gosh, like Prince is with Lettucey now, like that's dope. And just Liv, Elisa, and Shelby. I mean, this is off on a tangent, but I too love their chemistry and the harmonies that they were able to create. So I love that he did that. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate what Prince was doing at the time and making the statement, and I just try to ignore the backlash, but that is where it's coming from. But I also do want to give space too for people who just might not like Shelby's style. Shelby is an amazing singer and performer. But she comes from a certain gospel tradition that is common among Black singers. So I think, I was talking about this earlier with KaNisa and Scott Woods. It's like if you compare Shelby to a Rosie has like a more, like Rosie Gaines, she has more of like a distinctive style. So I can totally see how people might prefer her to Shelby. But it is really hard to compare, like, each singer brings their own thing, but I do want to allow space for people who just might not have preference for that.
Yeah, because I'd ask in that same chat with Erica and Scott, like, were people complaining about Rosie Gaines when he put her forward to sing a whole song with him accompanying? like they are complaining about Shelby when she does the same. And I think it's interesting that there's not that same kind of backlash. But Miss TLC, were you about to say something too?
I think also because at the time with Rosie and Bonnie and anyone prior, I feel like they were creating new songs. Like, I mean, Diamonds and Pearls obviously is an obvious one where that, you know, Rosie really helped to make the song. So, you know, it was new music with them, and you kind of saw that it's like, well, Rosie is a part of this and she has to be a part of this. And I feel like there was kind of a backlash where people felt like Prince can do this on his own. He's always showed us that he could do this on his own. So if he's just going to do like his greatest hits, I don't need other people doing it with him, which is unfortunate, because if you are a follower of his entire career, then you know that a big part of why most of us love Prince is because he treasures musicians and artists, you know, across the world, and he helps to expose you to a lot of that talent. In a lot of ways, he was an A&R representative, and he was, you know, serving up all these people on a platter to everyone, like, hey, you know, you can come to my show and see this amazing talent. I mean, that's what he advertised in the press conference when he first announced this tour. He's like, you know, you're gonna come and see just a lot of like dope musicians and artists, and it's not just about me, which was a charitable thing to do, because he knew that he was also, you know, 40 years into his career, and it's like, you know, this is kind of my time to give people my platform and pass along my audience and help to boost these other talents. But you know, I also would then search and take it further with a lot of those artists. And, you know, Liv, for example, I've gone to several of her live shows for her solo material, and I just adore her. I think I even like prefer Liv by herself than with the stuff that I listen to her with Prince. It's like she could even go, you know, so much further and so much higher on her own. I mean, her live shows solo are just absolutely incredible. You know, if anyone hasn't seen her live, please go and you know, buy yourself a ticket, because yeah, I mean, the people that he surrounded with him, especially during this particular era, I mean, they were all outstanding. There was nobody that didn't deserve that stage.
You know, it's just, the question is who is criticizing, because Prince has always exalted big voice singers, Black female singers. I mean, he did a record with Angie Stone and I'm gonna forget the name of the group that he worked with from Grand Rapids on that same song. I mean, he's always incorporated big voice singers in his mix some way, somehow. So, I mean, we kind of were critical of the ones that maybe didn't have as big voices, you know, but echoing what Miss TLC said, I mean, I've seen Liv. I saw Liv do the after show the first year that they did Prince live on stage post celebration. And that was amazing, because it turned from Live into this big jam session, and it was just something you would never forget. So I think Prince on this album in particular, and even watching that show from the Blu-ray in 2010, or was that 2010 that show was? But in any case, the album exalting and putting the voices of women forward is something that he did his entire career. And on this album, he just does it in a very undeniable way. And I think it's amazing. I think it shows you how much he revered singers and singing, and particularly the sound of female voices and Black female voices and full voices. And it just, to me, is one of the great parts of this release, that he gave them the stage, really, and pushed them forward and put them forward and gave them arrangements that really worked with their voices and worked with their voices together. So I just don't know who's doing the criticism. I'm convinced that there are some people who just don't like, you know, when I see things like people who don't like Jennifer Hudson singing, and they don't like Fantasia singing because they scream too much and they're screechy and this and that. I'm like, you just don't understand Black women who sing from the church and from the heart and from the soul. I just saw Respect, so I'm on a high after seeing that movie, and that just kind of reminds me of what I think Prince loved about Black women and soulful singing. I think that was just something that he loved all of his life, and he brought it into his music whenever he could.
Absolutely agree. I wanted to jump in. It was interesting a few years ago when Liv's Unexpected album came out. And I had the opportunity to interview her and Andy for my soultrain.com, which no longer exists, column. And I was asking Liv specifically about what it was like to work with Prince, to be in the studio with him, and for the three women to sing. And one of the things that stood out to me was she was like, Prince pretty much has us write our own arrangements. So we get the basis of the song, we know what the music is doing, and he gives us space to come up with what it should sound like from a singer's perspective. So I think that there's a tendency for people to just dismiss a lot of the artists that Prince has surrounded him with for various reasons. And again, to everyone's point, that's been especially prevalent with some of the Black women that have been in his world over the last however many years. But he absolutely had extraordinary level of respect for what they did. He absolutely could have sat down and written all of their vocal parts. And as he did with so many others, I mean, we all heard the originals album. We know that pretty much everybody else copied, note for note what Prince did on their demos. But he gave them, and I think maybe because he had reached a certain point in his life as a person and in his life as an artist, where he could actually entrust his collaborators to collaborate and to make the thing that he was putting together even more fantastic, because he was giving them even more space to bring their gifts and their talent to the stage. So when Liv mentioned that, that he allowed them to get together as a trio and figure out what the vocals are going to be and what this needs to sound like, and are we going to harmonize here? Are we going to sing in unison there? Who's going to take the lead? Who's going to be heard more? All of that kind of stuff. I think that it speaks to his level of trust with that particular group of women, and his ability to see a vision that maybe some of us don't always see, and what he can let the people that he has handpicked to be in his crew do. When I spoke with Andy, it was very much the same thing. We were talking about Superconductor and, how much involvement he had and how much leeway she had. And it was, again, very much the same thing. She understood that she had the opportunity to make this album with, a world-class musician, and all of the musicians that he had at his disposal, he made available to her. But she also shines through. She doesn't have the same kind of stage presence, I would say, as Liv and Shelby and Elisa and so forth. She's, dynamic in her own way. She's got a slightly different kind of voice, which I think actually even adds even more flavor to what he was trying to do, because where he's got these big voiced singers, he's also got singers like Andy who have very pretty, softer, gentler, but still very powerful voices. And I think in all of those cases, he really recognized what they had to bring to the table, and he gave them space to do that.
I'm really glad that you brought both of them up, because I was listening to both Andy and Liv's albums last night. I really like them both. And I think Prince as a producer in the later years gets not enough shine. Again, talking to me and Erica and Scott talk all the time, just all day. But anyway, we were talking about last night and how, like, when you think of, well, let me not name people from the 90s, but when you think of the people that Prince produced in the 90s or even the 80s, they have this kind of
thinner voice singers, just say that.
when people think about them, they're like, oh, The Family is great, and like all these albums in the 80s and early 90s were so much better. But I don't hear as much people talking about Andy's album or Liv's album, both of which he executive produced, co-wrote songs with. And to Rhonda Nicole's point, that they had a lot more leeway and the freedom that they had to work on those albums. Like, people don't think Andy wrote her own lyrics. Like, she didn't have music out before Prince, and she went on to make music after Prince. I like the Superconductor album, but I also kind of prefer her non-Prince produced album because I feel like they're more authentic to her voice. But Liv's Unexpected album is amazing. And I was saying last night that you were listening to it, and I didn't want to read the liner notes first time I heard it, so I could pick out the Prince written tracks. But he didn't write all those either, because she has her own talent as a vocalist and as a musician herself. And I always thought it was strange that, people didn't really check for those albums like that without him, super pushing them forward, like on the Arsenio show, or pushing Andy forward to draw on stage, or sometimes kind of play the guitar. But their Week in Love album is exquisite. So I just kind of wanted to thank you for bringing that up, because I feel like that deserves to have some more support. And Erica, did you have anything else? Because I know you were talking a little bit about Tamar too.
I was going to bring up Tamar. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I love Tamar. I felt like I'm not drawn to all of the associates or proteges, but I thought Tamar on stage with Prince was electric. Her energy and her voice, and she is someone that I followed a little bit post Prince. And then I will say, and probably make some people mad, like Justice for Elixir. Like, not that I think Bria is an amazing singer. But I think, what Prince did with his production of her album, I thought was really, really successful and really pleasing. I mean, I don't think she's still singing now. I wouldn't follow her, but I thought what he did with that album deserves more recognition.
Yeah, y'all are gonna make me go back and listen to Elixir. I've never listened to it. I literally opened the Lotus Flower album and took that CD and set it aside.
No, please try it.
Because honestly, by that time I had gotten to the point where I was like, come on, dude, is it gonna be some, because I mean, some of the stuff that he put out for other people was like, sir. Right. So I was like, but I'm going to go and listen to it. I'm going to find the CD at my mom's house tonight and I'm going to listen to it.
And I think he also, unfortunately, did it a disservice by mentioning the Sade connection, because then it just like turned people off. Like, come on now, she's not, Sade. But just a quick mention of like Tamar, that it made me think of it when Rhonda said how Prince really gave these women such freedom to kind of figure those things out for themselves, because Tamar's a friend of mine. And I mean, there's just so many positive things that she's told me about that entire experience, that, Prince was really the one to give her that push and give her that confidence, from everything with vocal arrangements to choreography, to say like, you could figure all of this out for yourself. And I trust in it, and I'll show up that night and I'll just go along with it, because I think that, our music meshes well together, and I'll, give you material and give you the ideas to kickstart your career, obviously, with the 3121 era, with the Beautiful Loves and Blessed and the appearances, all over the place on, Good Morning America and Saturday Night Live and stuff. So clearly he's helping to propel you get to that place, but he really did give a lot of those powerful singers the freedom to kind of find that voice within themselves.
I think it is. We would be remiss, and El Jabara mentioned her, and I have to mention her as well, to not talk about Judith Hill, because I think she's an unfairly controversial figure within the Prince realm. However, she's a beast. I had the exquisite pleasure of seeing her live shortly after he passed. Actually, she did a tour that was cut short, I believe. And I mean, she has a band, as you guys all know, with her family, so it's like her mom on keyboards, and I think her father plays the bass, and she just blew up the joint. I mean, her funk is for real. And I could understand, when they were talking about, she was talking about the conversation that they had on the plane, where they were talking about Betty Davis, my birthday twin. I have to say that. And I got it, because she's as close as you might be able to get to a Betty Davis style performer. Her funk is in the groove. She's a real soul sister. And I think, it's unfortunate that controversy has overshadowed her career in the way that it has.
And I was going to say, people have to understand too. I mean, that's also trauma that has affected her, and obviously the growth of her own career. I mean, just it's mind-boggling to know like the coincidences of what she's been around and what she had to be involved in, and then how she had to be vilified at the press for that. But there's also a business component, unfortunately, that people may or may not know. But there was, Prince obviously was not fond of contracts, and, sometimes was stepping over boundaries and on lines that, Judith had already a recording agreement in place, and he went ahead and, you know, recorded with her and just put the album out. And then, you know, under Universal, like, we had to, you know, bring that to the table in a legal way, because it was like, well, you know, if we've invested the money and if we have her under contract for one of our sub labels, then you can't just say, well, now she's my artist and I'm going to actually release it myself and start putting it on the internet. So, you know, it was unfortunate for her that there were just a lot of stops in place because of that.
I remember getting that email from Prince with Judas' album, and I was like,
yeah, Jolene Cherry was a little surprised by that email.
Yeah, it was great. Like, the music journalist in me was like, yes, oh my God. Like, but then I was like, oh.
And thank you guys for bringing up Judith, because I love her too. I've seen her a couple of times now live, and it's amazing, like, when you see people who are like born to do this, and I feel like she absolutely was, because she's like breathtaking. Like, I get the same feeling when I see Live live, because it's like you actually get chills of how talented they are.
Can I just say one thing too? I think, you know, probably not for those of us that are here today, but even I've been guilty of it, that we tend to put a lot of attention on the most commercial music. So the Adeles of the world, the pop, you know, culture divas of the day. And one of the things that Prince has done for me has gotten me into listening to and appreciating music that's outside of that scope, and artists that are outside that scope, and ones that may not chart, or they chart low, or they don't get the push or the promotion, or, you know, now radio play is not obviously the same as it used to be, but that it really just gives you so many different options in terms of musical branches that you can go off to if you're not someone who's already exploring those. And I think it's just been great for me. Every year that I've been at Celebration, there's been a concert that's happened outside of Celebration and outside of artists that I may not listen to every single day, but those live performances and what comes up around that is just so musically invigorating that it's just great. It's great to just see things and experience artists that I wouldn't necessarily pick up as my first choice every day, you know?
Okay. So now let's turn to the actual album. I was half joking earlier when I was talking about When She Comes. So now I would like to actually talk about When She Comes. So, of course, we know this song from Hit and Run Phase 2, but we get a different take on this particular album. And I have to say that was the one I was most excited to hear. You won't talk about why, or I guess you can guess. But what were you guys' thoughts about that particular song on this earlier take of When She Comes? And whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll start.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was really surprised by it. Again, as I said earlier, I didn't know that this album existed. So I don't think that I knew that there was another version of When She Comes. So, you know, for all of the Prince, I've already heard that smartassery that I certainly serve out on a daily basis. This was a welcome surprise. In listening to this earlier version and comparing it to the later version, I like them both. I haven't decided which one I like best, but for sure, the earlier version is raunchier, but still in that I'm a grown up now, so I don't do those things that I used to do type of way that Prince got into later in his career, where he was, I'm still nasty, but I'm nasty like a grown, mature adult and not a 20-year-old. But it's still very sensual and still very luscious. Like there's something about the way that he's singing on that song that is just, like I think we've all expressed that on Twitter or what have you, that pretty much all of us had to take a moment, after hearing that song, because it really is very sexy and very sensual, and a reminder that Prince does that very, very well. That, Marvin Gaye before him and so many others that we could name, that he really does. I mean, he does the nasty stuff extremely well too, but he also does the subtle and the sensual and the build up to whatever happens next very, very well in song. And that song is absolutely a great example of how he's able to capture love and lust and sensuality and sexuality and this maturity that allows you to express these things in a way that's very honest and open and vulnerable and still have it sound just absolutely spectacular.
I do prefer this version. I think, like Rhonda said, I think that they're both strong, but I do prefer this one. And I do think that, you know, the song itself earned its ticket to the club with, you know, Scandalous and Insatiable and Satisfied and, you know, all the songs before it, that it showed, you know, he always had that in him, you know, whether or not he went through his personal journeys where he didn't want to be as explicit, it was always still a part of him if he needed to, you know, bring it out. And whether he wanted to be fully sexual or just sensual or have innuendo or be a little bit more direct, like no matter which flavor he wanted to give you, it was still there. And I definitely think that, like I said, it earned its keep in that block of beautiful ballads.
For me, oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
For me, I like the Hit and Run Phase 2 version better. Again, I had a relationship with that one, and the lyrics are more mature on the Hit and Run Phase version. They're more poetic. I think KaNisa, in one of our conversations, like you said on the Welcome to America version, he's like, okay, when she comes a lot. But it's more subtle on the Hit and Run Phase 2 version. So I need more time with the music to figure out which one I like better musically, I would say, because I'm just so biased. But the lyrics are definitely stronger on the Hit and Run version.
I am such a fan of this song. It is just one of my favorite Prince songs of all time. You know, it's interesting when they say that he made Born to Die to counter Cornel West saying that, well, he's Prince, but he ain't no Curtis Mayfield, because I always thought that this song had a very Mayfieldish vibe. You know, it's Prince. So I guess when I asked how you just flip your own shit like this, I can only answer by saying it's Prince, and that's just what he does. I mean, he flipped Something in the Water like 10 times, you know, and each version is separate and distinct and interesting and fabulous. And I just didn't think he could take a song that I love that much. And I guess he flipped the second version is the flip, but that I like them both. It's just it's understanding Prince's songwriting process to a certain degree, that he has this song that is kind of almost amorphous in its form, and then he takes it and makes it into more of a realized song. But this first version is just sexy as, you know, I was about to say. This first version is just so sexy, and everything that he's saying in it is so just Prince. You know, he's giving you, yeah, he's older Prince, but he's still giving you some of that young boy talking shit. But then he then turns it into this very fully realized version that is still sexy as I stand in awe, as always, at the man's genius, because to take a song that I just had so much appreciation for and know that there was a previous version and that this was the extension of that was just me shaking my head once again at how brilliant the man was.
Well, to your point also, Tonya, you know, he referred to his songs often as his children. And, you know, sometimes when he would pull something out of the vault and work on it more, he would make that reference, you know, my children deserve life and, you know, they need to be out here in the world. And I think that that's connected to that analogy because they were living works of art. He didn't think that, okay, I'm going to go in the recording studio, knock this out, put it out, and that's it, case closed. He still felt like even if he gave it to somebody else, well, now I'm going to take it back. Well, now I'm going to remix it. Well, now I'm going to do a different version. Well, now I'm going to make it a duet. You know, now you have the live version. Now you have, you know, and so I think that that just, you know, spoke to the point that they were living works of art for him. So he felt like, as I evolve, I feel like I want to flip this and do a different version of it. And you could like them both. You could like one, not the other. It's up to you, you know.
I love that. I love the idea of living works of art, because it just seems like even when people ask, why did he put this album away? It's like, Maybe he just had an idea, he was going to do it next week or next month, or he just kept recording because he was always recording. And who knows, he might have forgot he made it. He was always doing so much stuff. He was so forward thinking. So when you put it in that perspective, like, I love that they were living works of art, that no song was ever truly finished, because he might come back. I mean, he's sampling himself in certain songs, which you gotta love it. It's just amazing to have that body of work to be able to draw from.
It feels too like the version that we got on Welcome to America is perhaps when the relationship begins, because when a relationship is new, there's a lot of discovery. And the later version that we get on Hit and Run is the relationship a few years in, and the relationship has matured. The relationship has not gotten stale by any means, but there's a different level of interest and intrigue later on in that same person, if you will. And it feels like perhaps that song does that here. I mean, I don't know, I don't know what his intentions were, obviously, when he wrote it originally and when he recorded it in this particular iteration, and then when he did it again for Hit and Run. But it kind of feels like it's a continuation of a conversation that started many, many years ago with this one person, whomever that might be. And this is where it has evolved into.
Yeah, I agree.
I love that.
Shout out to Harold Pride. He calls it Satisfied on the Couch. But like, I kind of agree with Erica here, because I like the music of the Welcome to version, but I like the lyrics of the later version because, like she said, they're more mature, and I prefer more subtle than right on the nose licking microphone prints personally. But I love that you said it that way, Miss Rhonda. I call everyone Miss, but because it just seems, well, I don't have that experience because that's a different podcast. But I think it's interesting when Prince is being more mature and more refined, and that's kind of the issue that I have with this particular album. First time listening to it, it was before, it leaked out, and I was gonna wait, but I also knew that my first time listening would have been at Paisley Park because I was traveling that whole day and I didn't want to be surrounded by people listening to a Prince album. And so the first time I had my Galaxy lights in my living room, I had my wine, I had it going, and to me it felt like these were ideas and not necessarily a finished product. And then for me, it doesn't matter that he didn't put it out. Like, if he decided he didn't want it to do it, and it's not going to happen. But my question to you guys is, like, what are the songs, how do they resonate with you with this album? Like, are there any songs that you would, I mean, we've asked this several times on the panels before, but are there any songs that sit with you, songs that will make it to your playlist? I know we have about 30 minutes left, but I wanted to ask, how do you feel about this album as a project for you personally? Not really how it fits in the legacy, not really how it fits socially, but as music for you, how does it fit for you as a Prince fan hearing it? And we can start with Miss TLC.
I definitely see replay value with this for me. I think the standout for me that I go back to very often is 1,000 Light Years from Here. It affects me, it does something to me. It's conceptually, it's the music, it's the arrangement. Born to Die also, I just think is extremely powerful. So that, connection in the sequencing and When She Comes, and Rin Tin Tin is really, one of the standouts for me now. So I definitely feel like those four are absolutely like on playlists for me now. It's funny because people may, be offended or not, but Stands Up and Be Strong to me is like Still What Stands All Time, which I do not like as a recorded song. I love the live versions and I see the power in it as a live arrangement. But the recorded version I always just felt was too like saccharine for me. And I feel like Stand Up and Be Strong is like that until it becomes instrumental. And then actually the instrumental breakdown I think is extremely powerful. And I love that. So I will always like rewind that part and just keep listening to the solos. But yeah, definitely 1,000 Light Years from Here is wonderful for me, and Born to Die and When She Comes and Rin Tin Tin, like those four I feel like will have major replay value for me.
Okay, Miss Rhonda.
So, 1,000 light years from here makes me really, really sad and pensive, and I can't quite figure out yet if it's because I'm hearing it posthumously. The way, it's attached to Black Muse on Hit and Run, and that has a whole other emotional quality. Even before Prince passed and we realized that that was the last new album theoretically that we were going to get, the way the song is structured even there is very emotional, and there's the whole part of why is it so hard, why is it so far away, and all of that. Just I can't quite put my finger on why it affects me the way that it does, and I'm like, would I have felt this way if I had heard this version of the song while he was still here? Or is it just because he's gone and there's just this longing in it that for some reason the song evokes? I'm thoroughly enjoying the album. I was very excited when the single Welcome to America dropped a few months ago. I remember, waking up in the morning and doing what we all do, going to Twitter to see what had happened in the world while we were sleeping. And, the link was live, and I laid there in bed and listened to it. And I was like, whoa, okay, he just said that. Interesting. And again, listening to it now, understanding that it's an older song, but it's an older song that I'd never heard before. There are parts of that song specifically, and then just parts of the album in general, that do feel a bit dated in terms of how he's talking about certain things. Prince could get a little preachy. I mean, we heard that on the Rainbow Children, where he's like telling us about ourselves. And it's like, dude, no one asked. Stop it. But at the same time, it's still very thoughtful. And I feel like the music itself, even outside of the historical context or what specifically he's speaking of thematically, it's very, very strong. And like I said at the beginning, I really am enjoying being able to listen to it and hear every instrument, because Prince is so brilliant at layering and stacking and pulling in all of these things that may or may not necessarily be necessary. But this album feels almost like an acoustic album to me. And so to be able to hear everything so crisp and so clean and so clear is one of the things that makes it so enjoyable. So I still haven't had a chance to really, really live with it the way that I want to, just because, my travel schedule and stuff has been a little bit nuts. But what I have been able to really ingest and give my undivided attention to, I feel, is just very, very strong. I think that my least favorite song is probably Stand Up, Be Strong. It feels cheesy. It feels like easy lyrics that anybody could have written. And I do understand that it's a cover, but it's like, like it just isn't. Maybe if there had been a chance to hear it worked out live, I would have a different level of appreciation for it. But so be it,
Okay, Erica?
Yeah, so I would say about half the album is really solid for me. I think my favorite song is the title track, Welcome to America. I just love how that builds. I like Running Game, Son of a Slave Master, Born to Die, Same Page, Different Book, and Rin Tin Tin, which I've also mentioned. And then also 1,000 Light Years from Here, which I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about. And this was mentioned earlier today about Afrofuturism, and Cornel West does an amazing job breaking some of this down on the official Prince podcast. So I highly recommend that episode 2. But I also want to talk about Black liberation theology, because I think Prince is talking to everyone, but he's also talking to Black people with this. And I think that's why it resonates with me so much. It's like, God is on the side of the oppressed. Black people will be delivered. And then also like, get right with God so you'll be okay after you die. But then also, what can you do right now? And people have talked about this song in terms of Parliament, Funkadelic, but something hit me today. And I really think it's in conversation with Stevie Wonder's Heaven is 10 zillion light years away. And I'm going to try not to cry about this, but Stevie Wonder is talking about the same thing. And, one of the lyrics in that song is, why must my color Black make me a lesser man? I thought this world was made for every man. He loves us all. That's what my God tells me. And I think this song is drawing on that. We've talked about the line of we've got to teach them how to be American. But then there's also the line, get rid of the notion of crawl before you walk. And we know Prince has said that in his memoir. Like, that sounds like slave talk, right? We already talked about this being linked to Black Muse. So again, he's talking to Black people. But then also Prince says, salvation is near, it's here. So, imagine a world of freedom right now, and this is attainable. So I think that's why that song is so profound. The lyrics on this version and the lyrics on Black Muse, which are totally different, but they're getting at the same thing.
Thank you for pointing out those lyrics. I have to say that the first listen for me was just kind of like, okay. And I probably listened to like 2 or 3 times a day for like a week after that. And like Harold was saying earlier, it's just like you pop in with, you appreciate it more. Because sometimes Prince albums, you have to sit with it for a little bit for it to be truly absorbed. And so I did end up adding like half the album to my favorites playlist. It's like I always say, my least favorite playlist, I don't like Rave, or I don't like Batman, or I don't like 2010. And then like 6 of the songs are on my favorites playlist. So Tonya, how did you feel about the album personally, just the music itself?
So here's an interesting thing for me. I listen to a lot of Sirius radio because I'm in the car, and I realized that we now don't listen to the radio. So when the Prince channel was on, I'm in the car and I'm just, so songs are being played that are not on my playlist. They're just popping up. And I just think we take in music so differently now, because back in the day, you would sit down with an album and it was an album. It wasn't just something you had to, take a needle and not a needle. What's the thing? The thing that you put on the turntable, the arm or whatever. And you had to put it on there and you had to sit there and listen to it. It wasn't just something that was kind of fed into your ears. So I think you interacted with music differently. More people listen to the same music. So we had those iconic artists like a Michael and a Whitney and a Prince, because we were all listening to that music. Whereas now it's just so much more fragmented because you can get whatever you want on your Spotify, your Tidal playlist or whatever. So I was just thinking about that, because songs would come up on the Prince channel and I would be like, this is really great. Like, this is a great song that I wouldn't necessarily go on. I think it was Beginning Endlessly that I kept hearing, and I was like, damn, this is a great song. But I don't know that I would put this on any list of mine. It might be if I just took decide I want to play 2010. So I'm saying all that to say that one of the things that I truly appreciated about this is that it felt like an album, and it felt like something I needed to listen to as an album. And I've appreciated and listened to it thus far as an album, because the Deliverance EP wasn't really considered an official Prince release, because it wasn't. That's something though that I love. I love that song. I love the songs on that EP. However, the producer that stole it put them together. And I tend to listen to that as a whole. So for me, hearing Hot Summer, hearing Born to Die, hearing Welcome to America, all in different phases of this album project, I was kind of, okay, it's cool. I like it. But when I heard it play out as an album, I felt like it hangs together really well as an album, something that we're just not necessarily used to doing. And also the energy of this project. I was a teenager when Prince first came out. So I Want to Be Your Lover, and then all the sexy stuff, and then Dirty Mind, and then all these different phases of life that I went through at these various times. Well, now I'm older, and like Prince, you're thinking differently in your I was about to you're thinking differently in your age group than you were when you were younger, because you're thinking about different things, and your mind is expanding, and you're thinking about the world, and you're thinking about your legacy and the legacy and what's gonna, just all these things. And I feel like this album comes with those thoughts attached, and the collaborative nature of it, the centering of the female voices in it, the themes and the things that he was talking about. Like, people were acting like this is brand new, because it wasn't. These were themes he talked about throughout his career, and I just feel that it works very well for me as an album. I may have to get into listening to it more to isolate out certain songs, but when I play it, I always play it and then it's over. And my thing, I usually, it's on title, so it'll go into a playlist of songs associated with it. And I'm always like, damn, it's over. Like I'm always disappointed that it's not longer. So for me, it just resonates and works for me as a full project. And I feel like one that Prince oversaw and that he wanted to be heard in that way.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so I guess we have about 15 minutes left. So I want to just kind of ask just summary questions about how we feel now that we have had the first full Vault album out, that they chose that album to be from a later year. Of course, it would make sense that they would do that since they have spent so much time in the 80s and things like that. And we've had several different reissues out from Sony. We've had the back catalog on streaming services. It's interesting to see so much of Prince out and to see him be promoted in this way. I think somebody commented that if he were here, this type of promotion wouldn't have happened because he didn't necessarily promote himself this well. So I guess my question is kind of like, and I know we've kind of asked this before, but how do you feel the releases are going with this latest release? Do you feel it's getting better? Are there things with this release that you wish had been done better at this point versus the last one that we had, Out of Sign of the Times? So we'll start with Rhonda.
That's a great question. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't spent a significant amount of time thinking about the promotion because I think I've just been so caught up in the excitement of the stuff, whatever the stuff is. I think kind of going back a few years to the first official posthumous release, which was I think the Purple Rain reissue. And I wasn't necessarily as excited about that because I'm like a lot of deep Prince folks, and I don't necessarily get as excited about that album as others. Love it, think it's great, but I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And of course I got it, but I wasn't as intrigued. I was far more excited about Sign of the Times for a lot of different reasons. And I think that what they have been doing, I think what we have seen is that they're getting smarter about how they do the releases and how they do the promotions. And I would imagine, and I've said this in other spaces, that it can be probably an interesting conundrum trying, from the estate's perspective, to serve the diehard group of people that will always buy something, whatever it is. If they say we're going to put some old guitar picks on, the official Prince website that Prince chewed on once, there's somebody in this particular cohort who would be like, oh my God, take my money. But so they have to continue to serve that particular demographic, that diehard core fan base, if you will. But then there's the need to grow, and there's the need to continue to expand his legacy, because this can't just be supported by the people who love him the most. They have to be able to build, they have to be able to reach new listeners, new ears. And whether that's people who just casually listen to Prince off and on over the course of the last 40 years, or people who weren't even born yet when he was doing some of his biggest stuff, or people who, really came to know him from his 90s work, Gen Z and them and beyond. They still have to be able to sell him in a very compelling way. So I think that was one of the reasons that I pointed out earlier that, using TikTok as a platform to, release a song was smart. It may not make sense to the Gen X's out there, but it makes sense. It makes sense to me as a marketer, but it may not necessarily resonate with some of the older members of his collective. But for the opportunity that it presents to reach younger people, to reach new audiences, to reach people who may not have paid any attention previously, I think it's been a very, very smart rollout. This one was done exceptionally well. And again, I think that they're just getting smarter and more strategic, and it's very interesting to watch it happen. And this is something that they're going to have to be able to sustain for 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line. So I think that in this first 5 years since, as Darling Nisi says, he ducked out, I think that they've done a very good job of rolling out the releases, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here and what we get in terms of new material that has not necessarily been heard or bootlegged to death, as well as what they do with some of the older legacy material again, because they're going to have to redo Purple Rain again. They're going to do the Sign of the Times thing again. I would be surprised if they did not re-release those re-releases in another 10 or 15 years to capture another audience.
I think that Darling Nisi is frozen. Are you back, KaNisa?
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was talking and nothing happened. Oh, okay. So I was asking, same question, Erica. Like, as far as releases, do you feel like the estate is getting better, or is there anything that you wish that they would have done or would do better?
Yeah, so I thought this was done exceptionally well. I don't have any critiques on this release, but what was interesting to me is the conversation around this compared to his other 2000s work. It was like, oh, this is the strongest from the 2000s, and I don't necessarily agree with that. And I guess it's very telling because they re-released Musicology, 3121, Planet Earth, and I guess Musicology got its due in its time, and Planet Earth is the weaker of the three, so whatever. But 3121, I felt like hasn't gotten its due. Also, I think, KaNisa, you and I have talked about One Night Alone and the Rainbow Children. I felt like they tried with those re-releases. It didn't have as big of a flash as I would have liked. And so I think it's just going to be, I don't know, like picking and choosing my battles, and maybe some things are going to do well and some won't. Like, I felt like the re-release of The Truth, I wanted to see more music criticism on that of Prince as a guitar player. And I thought there should have been more hype around this acoustic album that not a lot of people heard in real time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like, I felt like they should have packaged Black is the New Black with this, but some people were saying, well, if people couldn't handle Welcome to America, they can't handle Black is the New Black. So it'd be interesting to see if that even comes out. Also, I really hope they dig into some of the 90s work. Like, for example, like The Undertaker. It would be cool if they released that with like an issue of Guitar World or Guitar Magazine, the way Prince wanted to do it back in the day. Like, how I have like these things that I think should be done, but I don't know if they're going to do them that way. So like, I hope things go a certain way, but it'll be interesting to see if they do. And I'll try not to get too disappointed because I do think they're doing a good job.
Okay. Miss TLC?
I agree for the most part with everything that's been said. Everybody has their opinion, of course, and things that they think are up and down with stuff that's already come out. And as we had referenced before, and D'Angela and Ricky and I and Dwayne had spoken about, unfortunately, when the person that you love is the pinnacle of all recorded music, you're going to be spoiled to a sense, to a degree. So, but when you step back and you actually look at everything that has come out posthumously, I mean, we had so much now that I think even people forget about it. When you think about like, oh, Forever and the Purple Rain release and the 1999 Super Deluxe, and then the Sign of the Times Super Deluxe and Originals and the Piano and a Microphone, the rehearsal sessions and the Versace Experience and The Truth. And, there has been a lot of products that has come out in these 5 years. So I have also, seen people complain on that side of it, that they don't have the money for all this, which, I sympathize with that as well, when people really want to dive into some of these deluxe products and they just don't have the funds for it when they're coming out so close to each other. So you can't win with that. I know you're never going to satisfy everybody. I think that where they're at, like in just figuring it out, I think that they've come a long way in a short amount of time, because as much as people may say like, oh, 5 years, that's so long, it's really not if you check out what's happened with other estates. A lot of times things really don't get like going until, 10 years at least. And we have gotten a lot like thus far. So I am pleased with it that way.
Okay. And round us out, Miss Tonya.
I would personally like to see more limited edition. I would love a box set, like maybe a limited edition one of all of his studio albums that he released when he was here. I think that would be amazing, and they could do so much with that and make it super expensive, as I'm sure they would, but package it up in some kind of amazing limited edition. And I would love to actually see, and I know this could go either way, but I would love to see the same kind of thing, having contemporary artists cover his songs for a tribute album, and handpicked ones, hopefully. Really, really A&R it and make sure we get the right folks singing the right songs. But similar to what they did with Nina Simone, the tribute to Nina Simone. So you had a bunch of different people who sang on that album, and I think they picked some good folks like Lauryn Hill, and I would really, really love to see that. Obviously, not a music release, but I would also love to see the documentary sometime soon, because I think as we talk about his legacy for future generations, having Aretha's movie come out and then having Genius Aretha, the 5 or 6 part series, I think got people so much more interested in her life and career. And I think, though I never want to see a Prince biopic, I do think, though I'm sure 20 years down the line it's inevitable, I do think that those are the kinds of things, aside from what Rhonda was saying with TikTok, that get a younger generation interested in finding out more about that artist and why they were so special to people, and what people loved about them. So more projects that are maybe not music all the time, or creative ways of working with the music that has already been put out, because, just putting out new releases and new releases and new releases, I don't necessarily get that strategy is the best one, but I guess we'll see what the estate thinks and does.
Yeah, I kind of agree, but they did an amazing job releasing with the promotion of this album, and it's getting better and better. I do wish that there was as much effort around the reissues, but I understand why there may not be. Like the 3121, they changed their social media pictures, and I wish we would have gotten a movie with that too, like some new content around the reissues. But I also saw like people who haven't, like especially younger people who haven't heard it before. They're like, wow, this 3121 is blowing my mind. Never heard this song before. But I think there's also a disservice. Like I see like younger Prince Twitter they make all kinds of amazing content on TikTok, on Twitter. I think Alluring Tia is starting a podcast for 25 and under Prince fans. So look out for that. So I feel like they are there. They are also the people who ran Purple Tumblr with the pictures and the GIFs. And so they're around. But I think that there is opportunity to collaborate with some of the younger stars. Like you have Yara Shahidi. She's already linked to Prince through her father. So to have her host, like, I don't know, when 3 Chainz comes around, or when the Love Symbol album comes around, have her host a day on FX, or like kind of bring those people into it, not to necessarily promote the music or sing the music like her did, but to say the work is there. It just needs to be promoted more. So like have those people host a viewing of a show, or have interstitial commercials with them saying something about it. Or even it's a big deal when you come across someone on Instagram and they're wearing a Prince shirt. They're like, oh my God, there's a basketball player and they're wearing it. It's a little thing, but it helps for people to see him past what they already know, past the Purple Rain, past the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's just, how do we continue to promote already there? We love the new stuff, but also there's a whole 10 years that people had checked out of or got kind of distracted by the politics of Prince, that they weren't paying attention. And like Erica and I were on the official podcast for One Night Alone, and it was a perfect time for it to be promoted because we were going through George Floyd and everything, especially with the messages of the Rainbow Children and the One Night Alone era, but they delayed it a couple of months because they didn't want to compete with that. I'm like, no, that's where, because we're talking about that on the podcast. So I think, I get why they put out this album now. I thought it was interesting how much they centered his blackness. I thought it was interesting that it's kind of the first time they widely did that with these type of deluxe things, and they kind of zoomed out to think of how Prince impacted culture more with this one than previous ones that were here's his personal life and here's from his girlfriend and here's how the house got decorated. I'm like, I don't care about that. Tell me more about how the music got made. Tell me more about the studio sessions. Tell me more about like the work, the promotion, the concert. I mean, they did that in the podcast. I'm just saying I got a little irritated with how that went. But I don't know. I just kind of wanted to bring that forward. Like the promotion has been getting better, and thank you for the podcast with Andrea Swenson's doing a great job. They are obviously listening to the feedback to make the changes, and I hope that continues to be the case as they go forward.
Well, I do think that the estate in general is going to have to get, quite creative. And I think that, the ideas that you just mentioned and that Tonya just mentioned and that, a lot of people in the community are always bringing up online should be taken into consideration because, with an artist such as Prince, his bread and butter and what kept him going for decades really was his live performances. So when you take that person out of the equation physically, but there still is a lot of material to work with. But you're also dealing with someone who wasn't necessarily out there front and center, even when he was here in doing promotions or letting things, go and be online or be in commercials or, be in stuff like a TikTok promotion. There's just that line to walk and kind of figure out like what really works. Because as much as I understand people, being sensitive to certain issues, in order for his legacy to be out there, to stay alive and for everybody to have these opportunities for decades to come, like there's going to have to be things like that maybe you personally feel like, oh, well, Prince wouldn't have wanted this, but they're going to have to get creative and try a lot of those different platforms, Interestingly enough, we hadn't addressed, I know this is the time is done, but when this album was created, I mean, no one knows for sure like what was in his head as far as why he set it aside. But interestingly enough, just from an industry side, in 2009, 2010, Lady Gaga was supposed to do a tour with Kanye and it had fallen apart. They pulled out of it. And Lady Gaga had issued an interview at that time saying that she thought the future was going to be that artists would give their music away for free and that the recorded music is kind of just like your temptation to get people to spend money on coming to see you live, and that true artists were going to up their live game and that's how you would pull people in. And she was, taking a step back to kind of just rethink, her whole live presentation. And, at the time at Universal, of course, everybody was very sensitive to that type of perspective because then at the same time, Kanye was working into his My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy era, and he decided to give away music for free with his Good Fridays initiative. And, on the inside, we were spending a lot of money to have him record what he wanted to record and travel and, the A&R budgets. And then you're just out here giving everything away for free. So of course, like the business component of it and the labels were thinking like, I don't know if this model works, but I was kind of on the controversial side of it because in the meetings I was like, well, I get where they're going with this. And for an artist like Prince, who was trying to explore these channels and was trying to do things in more of a creative way and issue albums with, newspapers or give them away. Like when you came to see the tour in person, he was definitely ruffling feathers in the industry, but he was doing things in such like an innovative way that I think he perhaps thought the same thing with this. Like perhaps he did feel like, this type of music deserves like a platform on stage. And, maybe I will come up with another creative way to kind of just get it out there and then pull people in to kind of see the stage show perspective of it, the presentation of it. So I do think that there's a lot of creative things that the estate can kind of highlight in that way as well. Like they've now brought up, how he affected culture and how he was a technologist and how he was just an artist and a philanthropist, but, to also just focus on how he changed the business and how it's still changing and evolving, like still now in 2021, and maybe do something like creative with it in that way. Like maybe there will be something that's perhaps given away for free and then it links you into some other part of the Prince experience. I think that, there could be a future there as well.
Well, they're going to find a way to sell the brand, believe me, because I just read that Michael Jackson's estate in the 11 years since he's passed has made $2.2 billion, and with a lot less to work with than what Prince has in the vault, and then the 400 hours of footage that apparently they found in the walls at Paisley. So there's so much that can be done. There's so much that the public hasn't even seen. I mean, there's the piano and a microphone show the first show that he did at Paisley Park. There's the one that he did in Oakland. There's the full show. There's so many full shows that they show at Paisley that the public hasn't even seen. So there's fan collections of things. I mean, there's a million ways to, unfortunately, we now have to look at Prince as a brand, as opposed to the living artist that he was. And if Michael Jackson, again, obviously a superstar on a different level, not necessarily a higher or lower, but if he can make that much money without even having things to sell aside from brand Michael, then imagine what they can do with all these things that Prince has left us. So I definitely think you're going to see some creative ideas coming forth, and the fan community has suggested so many, from a streaming membership to other things, that I think you are going to see some of those things come to light because they know they can monetize it, and that's what they're going to do.
Yeah. So I think that's our time. D'Angelo, there she is.
Yes, I am here. Thank you so much. This was such a wonderful panel. Actually, Rhonda Nicole had to leave because she literally has a gig right now. So that's the reason why she actually popped off, and that's the reason why she was in her car. So I really want to give special thanks for Rhonda for actually doing this when she had a lot of pressure on her to perform. And also I'd like to thank all of the ladies on the panel, each and every one of you. You're so special. I mean, obviously, everybody loves Darling Nisi, but we should call her KaNisa. I've tried it. Like when I say Darling Nisi, I call you that, but her name is KaNisa Williams, so let's call her by her name. And Tonya Pendleton, you're always such a pleasure to have. And like I said, backstage, Miss TLC, it's been so wonderful to have 2 conversations with you in the same month.
It's been wonderful.
Yes, and Miss Erica Thompson, like I said, you are not a fill-in. You are supposed to be here. Thank you so much for actually answering and heeding my call. I really do appreciate it. There's a couple of things I want to say with the quickness, and then we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back at 6 p.m. for a very special conversation with Mathieu Beton about the amazing, just beautiful, beautiful packaging. So I was elated that show it. Yes. So the 2 really quick comments before we transition. I'm with you, Tonya. First of all, I've only been listening to the album as an album. I can't listen to one song out of context. And when I do listen to the album, it's too short for me. Like I get so first, like what? I literally the other night I was playing my vinyl, and I told my husband, I was like, "There's no 4th side. Where's the?" I totally knew that there was like an etching on the 4th side, but I'm like, "Isn't there another record I'm supposed to be?" Right. It was too short, so I'm with you there. The other thing I wanted to point out was Paisley Hart in the chat talked about having a live performance box set. I am so with you. That is actually what I want. So that's really, really important to me. So I'm really glad that Paisley Hart as well as Arlene Oak talked about that. Erica, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, not about that, but I just wanted to say shout out to Seeley and his wife. That was a beautiful comment that you made, and please get well soon.
Yes, definitely. We miss Seeley. We hope you get better soon. Thank you, Monica,
he's not feeling well?
No, he's not feeling well. It's not COVID.
Oh.
So don't worry about
Okay.
that. It's not COVID related, but he's not doing well. So I do want to thank Monica, actually, his wife, his lovely wife, for hanging out with us. She's been with us today, relaying some of his comments. So thank you, Monica, for spending your time with us today. I really do appreciate it. So I am going to make a quick turnaround. Again, drink some water, grab some food, do a bio break, and I will see you back at the top of the hour. As Larice was saying here, this panel was amazing. So thank you all.
Thank you all. You're all amazing.
Always great to share time with you wonderful ladies.
Yes, ditto. And thank you for the audience for tuning in and participating.
Yes. And there's a question, is Toby a Prince fan?
I mean, how could he not be?
Of course.
Like, I have to make him look away from One Night Alone Prince. He gets a little
You're going to catch him, like, putting stuff in the DVD player when you're not around.
That dog is adorable.
Oh my
God. Thank you, D'Angela, as always, for putting this stuff together.
Oh, thank you. I only do it because Prince, the things we do for Prince.
Right.
It's really important to give back to Prince. So that's the reason why I do it. And that's really the only reason. So I'm going to end the podcast and I will see you guys at the top of the hour.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.